ridiculously pulling down one another. The contents it may have the remarks we make, like if it's only Africans who does make mistakes. Some even go as far as to say that black people will never ever see the way. But when a black man keep a black man off of the shelf, he automatically keeping down his own self. Like you telling yourself that yourself is good. Ask yourself if you're thinking the way you should. Read history about the bad days of slavery, where so much Africans was killed by Mussolini. Jack the Ripper and Hitler were not black men, but did they have one black man who was bad like them? So ridiculing yourself is just ignorance. Mr. Black Man, give your own self a chance. Give yourself a chance. Give yourself a chance. Because they will kick we out of the dance. Hey! Love yourself first and take some examples from the other races that live with the people. They are united, they treat the women sacred. Any disrespect they will be aggravated. So Afro treating, hear what you must do. Try your best to treat your people the same way too. Help a brother or sister if they're falling down. And don't laugh when you see them flat on the ground. Like you're telling yourself that yourself is good. Ask yourself if you're thinking the way you should. BNM supporters, hatred may go. I wonder why they want Patrick Malley to go. But the other races is thinking this way. They wish for next day until resurrection day. So ridiculing yourself is just ignorance. Mr. Black Man, give your own self a chance. Give yourself a chance. Give yourself a chance. Because they will kick me off the dance. Hey! Those of you who have some form of education, impart your knowledge to help your brother man. Don't assassinate his character, only to prove that you are superior. Not like the MP for Tobago East, who always describe his people like beasts. He always this man, he loved to attack, like he vexed with his father for making him laugh. Like you're telling yourself that you're self-loved. Ask yourself if you're thinking the way you should. Ministry about Marcus Garvey, Makanda Daga, and Walter Rodney. And respect yourself in all that you do. Nobody in the world will do that for you. So ridiculing yourself is just ignorance. Mr. Black Man, give your own self a chance. Give yourself a chance. Give yourself a chance. Because we go end up last in the dance. Love yourself first and take some examples from the other races that live with the people. They are united, they treat the women sacred. Any disrespect they will be aggravated. So Afro treating, hear what you must do. Try your best to treat your people the same way too. Help a brother or sister if they're falling down. And don't laugh when you see them flat on the ground. Like you're telling yourself that yourself is good. Ask yourself if you're thinking the way you should. BNM supporters, hatred may go. I wonder why they want Patrick Malley to go. But the other races is thinking this way. They wish for next day ridiculing yourself is just ignorance. Mr. Blackman, give your own self a chance. Give yourself a chance. Give yourself a chance. Because they will kick me off the leader. Hey! Those of you who have some form of education, impart your knowledge to help your brother man. Don't assassinate his character, only to prove that you are superior. Not like the MP for Tobago East, who always describe his people like beasts. He always this man, he loved to attack, like he vexed with the father for making him laugh. Like you telling yourself that you're self-alone. Ask yourself if you think it the way you should. Ministry box, Marcus Gabi, Makanda Daga, and Walter Rodney. And respect yourself in all that you do. Nobody in the world will do that for you. So ridiculing yourself is just ignorance. Mr. Blackman, give your own self a chance. Give yourself a chance. Give yourself a chance. Because we go end up last in the most people was enslaved through all history. Many faced domination and treachery. It even happened here in the Caribbean. Caribs and Arawaks were enslaved to extinction. So we got to take example. If we want to progress as a people, read history so we could unite and fuse and stop using slavery as an excuse. Stop telling yourself that you're something good. Ask yourself if you're thinking the way you should. Just say women breeding in garbage. And the old black brothers, swines and savages. But why is he walking wrong, talking this rubbish? No Indian will say that about rubbish. So ridiculing yourself is just ignorance. Mr. Blackman, give your own self a chance. Look, try and learn fast. Don't try and learn fast. Because fast will put a kick in your ass.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes. You all see why we have to love being West Indian. That kind of music, those kinds of lyrics will only come from we. Will only come from me. Good evening, good night, good afternoon, wherever you're joining us from. We are on a mission. We're on a mission. Give yourself a chance. The mighty explainer, the messenger, Winston Henry. The old timers will know him. Will say, you remember he lost the crown to Stalin in 1979. Many people thought that he should have won. And he said, not me and the monarchy. The monarchy is a poppy show. I sing in calypso, not me and the monarchy. Very famous for that. And for the party people, you all remember him for Lorraine. It's cold in Brooklyn, and there is sunshine and calypso in Trinidad. Lorraine, don't cry, don't cry. You're going to see me on Ash Wednesday. I gone to Carnival. Winston Henry, the message man, doing one of the very important calypso. Give yourself a chance. And you always wonder, these calypsonians, they don't have PhDs and JDs and all of that stuff, but they're very steeped in history. They're very steeped in history, and he walked us through there. And it's always good to hear Trinidadian or a Guyanese or a Jamaican sing about our Caribbean. Our own Walter Rodney made it in that calypso. Give yourself a chance because they're going to kick we out the dance. And that's what they're trying to do. They've always been trying to do to kick us out the dance. But we never allow them to. And they're trying as hard as they can. Tonight we continue the conversation. Nigel Hughes, our senior counsel, is going to be here. Our senior counsel is going to be here. As you know, he's part of the IPADG delegation in Geneva, Switzerland. And today he made his presentation on behalf of IPADG. And we are going to be talking with Nigel tonight. As we said last night, please share the link. Share the link. We are not looking for ratings. What we're looking for is for this message to get to every Black person, every Black man, woman, and child, and others who are interested in racial harmony and our Guyana. We are talking about getting Black right so that we can get Guyana right and get our Caribbean right. That's our objective. And you all know what we're talking about here on this program. We ain't doing the thing upside down. You see the upside down thing, they say, well, Black people suffering, but other races suffering. No. We're done with that. Here's what we are saying. People of all races in Guyana are suffering. Poor people of all races are suffering. But Black people are experiencing that suffering in a peculiar way that demands us to open it up and to dissect it, because it goes deep in our history. It is in our blood veins, the system, as we say. So we turn in the story, and I hope the young politicians are hearing me, especially those in the PNC. It is not Black people suffering and other people are suffering. Oh, no! All peoples are suffering. All poor people are suffering. But Black people are experiencing that suffering in a particular and a peculiar kind of way because our experience has been a particular and peculiar experience. And that is why everybody, under this guise of one people, one nation, they're trying to rewrite the Black history. Oh, but we are saying to them to borrow a chant from our Indo-Guyanese brothers and sisters. This time not long time, this not day before time. We have enough of our people. You all hear what explainer said. If you get some education, use it to impart the knowledge on your people. And we, those of us who have been lucky to read books and read law books and read science books and travel the world, and we have a duty to use that experience and knowledge to help to lift all of us up. As we said, those who are crawling, those who are on their knees trying to drink some soup, when the thing come crashing down, some of us will be standing erect, but you will be on your knees. Get up and give yourself a chance. Every time we have fought together, we have won together, and we have won for everyone. Good evening and welcome to Politics 101. Nigel Hughes is here, and we are going to be talking to him tonight. He made a presentation today at that forum of people of African descent there in Geneva, Switzerland, and we are going to be discussing that with Nigel. And as usual, we don't catch him steady because he's busy. There's a reason he's our senior counsel. When you become the people's senior counsel, you are busy, 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 because there are always demands for your work, always demands for representation. Share the link, buckle up, because we are on our journey tonight, Wednesday night. We are talking black. And when we're talking black, we are talking back. And why are we talking back? Because somebody wants to back us up. And that is not going to happen. What did Brother Claude McKay say? With our backs to the wall, dying, but fighting back. If we must die, let it not be like hogs, hunted and penned in an inglorious spot. If we must die, oh, let us nobly die. That even the monsters we defy shall be constrained to honor us, though dead. Words of deep wisdom, penetrating the conscience of the world, that a warlord like Winston Churchill had to reach for the words, those words, from a little boy from Jamaica. The man who gave us banana bottom said, if we must die, then let it not be like hogs. And we take our cue. So we are ready. We are ready. Good evening to all of you, those of you who join us from London. I think you all are heroes and heroines because it's well past midnight. It's well past midnight where Nigel is joining us from Switzerland, that part of the world, in Europe, but it's all part of the struggle. It's all part of the struggle. So let's hear Nigel in Switzerland, and then we are going to roll after that.
From International Decade for People of African Descent Assembly, Guyana.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much. The following statement is presented by the International Decade for People of African Descent Assembly, Guyana, IPADG. IPADG comprises 78 non-governmental organizations and is committed to the pursuit of the goals of the decade. However, the government of Guyana seeks to decimate it by defunding the organization without merit or justification. In Guyana, the contribution of the people of African descent to its post-emancipation development in particular is either not recognized or is subject to degrading revisionism. We draw attention to this body to the concluding observations of the recent Human Rights Committee hearing on Guyana under the ICCPR in 2024, and I quote, "The committee remains concerned about the absence of comprehensive anti-discrimination legislation that may extend beyond discrimination in employment, provide full and effective protection against all forms of discrimination prohibited under the covenant, including direct, indirect, and multiple discrimination," unquote. African Guyanese are its daily victims. The Durban Declaration of 2001 and the United Nations Declaration of 2013, respectively, call for the inclusion of history in its school curricula, a victim-centered approach to its delivery. Practical measures such as the teaching young people the importance of tolerance and respect and the promotion of greater knowledge and the respect for diverse heritage, culture, and contribution of the people of African descent. Unfortunately, the United Nations call has not been heeded by the government of Guyana. This has resulted in the perpetuation of an identity crisis, non-recognition, injustices, and underdevelopment of the people of African descent writ large. This adds up to systemic discrimination. In Guyana, even the courtesy of a meeting with the government to advocate for a plan of action for the decade and the introduction of history of the people of African descent into the school curricula in particular has been denied. The forum is therefore challenged to call upon the state parties to redress this injustice, and in that regard, IPADG, I thank you.
Well, there we go. Brother Nigel Hughes there, making the presentation on behalf of IPADG. Brother Nigel, good evening. Good
Good,
night where you are. Good morning,
good,
because it's
good.
Thursday morning here.
Yes, it's 2 o'clock in the morning or something like that. Good morning, David. I really want to applaud. I applaud you every time I come on, but I really want to applaud the program you had last night with Vincent. It was excellent. I think a lot of information that was shared there is unknown generally, but particularly in the African Guyanese community, and it was quite an education. I want also to single out, well, it'd be Vincent, Olive, Darren Wade is here in Switzerland on the excellent work that has been done and continues to be done, and the presentations that are being made to the United Nations.
Thank you very much, my brother. As I listened to you earlier today, making your presentation, I reach into my reserves. I have, you know, Nigel, I started out as a political scientist. That's how I was trained at school. But really, if you go back in the village, many people would have said that, I would have gone on to be some kind of cultural person. I remember Eddie Green, the chancellor, who told me, David, you need to integrate your politics with your culture and communication, and steered me into the direction of Caribbean music as politics. And
Oh,
I
yeah,
know that is an area that you yourself are a
absolutely.
student of. And as I listened to you today, I said, what should I play? And explainer kept kept coming. I reached for Chalk Dust. He has a calypso called African Liberation Day, and but explainer kept coming to me. I think part of what you were saying there in Geneva really is what explainer is trying to nudge us towards. As you listen to explainers, give yourself a chance. Your thoughts.
Actually, I think Explainer said it much better than I could have today. The reality is, I suppose we call it consciousness, David, but you really have to, and consciousness is a general term that really, I suppose, captures the essence of what needs to be done. You need to know yourself. You made a very interesting comment just now. Sorry, I'm jumping about backs against the wall. I think it's a line either in Peter Tosh or Bonnie Whaler who says black people only know themselves when their backs are against the wall.
Peter Tosh, Peter Tosh.
Peter Tosh, right.
Yes.
Now, I think we are at the stage where in Guyana particularly, our backs are against the wall. And a lot of us, including myself, used to take the position that, you'd assist. But now, when collectively all our backs are against the wall, then you've got to step forward at every available opportunity to articulate not only our difficult circumstances, but to make sure that you participate in assisting in getting the just results that we deserve. We got to be in the dance, and we got to get our share of the dance.
We got to get our share of the dance. Nigel, before I get to your presentation proper, give us a sense of what it's like to be there. We understand that there are over 1,000 delegates to that forum, and that everyone is there making the case for Africans in their own country, their own part of the world. But as someone coming from Guyana, which has not always been a word that's on the lips of the world at large, coming from Guyana and being there, give us a sense of your own feelings.
Sure.
There, yeah.
Sorry, David. Let me to really accurately answer that. I need to give you a little background on the absolutely outstanding work that Epadaji has done, Olive and Vincent particularly. Let me put it this way: in 2022, the government of Guyana stopped all funding to Epadaji, literally overnight, shut it down. They had 20 plus employees. They had to shrink to 5. this organization, without any funds, came here last year because the intention of the government by shutting it down was to make sure it no longer had a voice, that it could no longer articulate on the issues that were affecting the African community. That was the intention. Let's not forget that. That was the sole intention of shutting it down. When they shut it down, the organization came here last year to Geneva. They found the resources. They came here. I participated last year and we articulated. We came back this year against great, great odds. We had to find our own resources. We got here. Ipadaji represented. I have to tell you, I was very humbled by the fact that this organization, with all the attacks that had been coming at it, we had to go to court. We are still in court. We haven't got a decision. The government attempted to undermine the association by saying, look, we're not going to fund you, but all the people underneath you, we're going to try and give them some funds, hoping that they would then walk away from Ipadaji and break it up, so to speak. Despite all of those efforts, we came here not only to articulate for the second decade of the decade of people for African descent, but we also were able and continue to be able to articulate the very difficult circumstances African people in Guyana find themselves in to this global body. Like you said, there are over 1,000 people here representing different interests. You've got the Malcolm X Foundation, you've got various foundations out of Africa. The Caribbean is very strongly represented both on the leadership, but also amongst the membership. We have a lot of people, obviously, from Africa, and the discussions are at the very, very high level, not only for the purposes of articulating the challenges, but more importantly, finding the solutions. We did not achieve all that we had to achieve in the first decade. And I have to say that there has been a unanimous demand for another decade. I read briefly, I think sometime in one of the papers today in Guyana, that they were saying, why you need another decade, the indigenous haven't got. The indigenous already got 2 decades before. And the United Nations recognized that a long time ago. So this has been an extremely humbling experience to me. I consider it a privilege, and I actually consider it, like you said just now, a responsibility. This is not about me. This is not about Ipadaji. Ipadaji is the instrument. This is about carrying that fight to its logical next step.
Nigel Hughes, there in Geneva at the Forum for African Peoples, United Nations Forum. This is the 3rd forum, and we have a delegation from Ipadaji there, Brother Nigel, Sister Olive Sampson, the CEO of Ipadaji, and Brother Darren Wade, young lawyer, country boy. And really, it's very, very heartening that the makeup of the delegation, really small though it is, it attempts to give the breadth of participation in our community. Nigel, you started your presentation in the following way. In Guyana, I'm quoting you here, the contribution of the people of African descent to its post-emancipation development, in particular, is either not recognized or is subjected to degrading revisionism. Let me repeat it, because, as you lawyers will say, I'm going to cross-examine you on it. In Guyana, the contribution of the people of African descent to its post-emancipation development, in particular, is either not recognized or is subjected to degrading revisionism. Now, I want you to address that, Nigel, but I am particularly interested, as our audience is, to the last part there or is subjected to degrading revisionism. You could explain it in 2 minutes. You have more than 2 minutes to open it up for us here.
All right. First thing, David, and I'm just following on from Vincent last night. A lot of people, when they hear the issue of the decade, they think of the period of slavery up to emancipation. The decade is post-emancipation, so we have to make sure that our timelines are very clear. This is 1838 before. Up to 1838, all of us were chattel. We were goods. Goods that, just like how you throw a pallet on a boat, that's exactly what we were. We were human cargo up to 1838. The decade adopted by the United Nations deals with, like you said in that statement, post-emancipation. And the revisionism that takes place, there's a lot of revisionism that takes place. If you just look at the history books that are in the schools, the role of Columbus, you come through from Columbus supposedly discovering the indigenous people who were here, coming all the way through from after 1838. What happened in the villages? What happened in the villages wasn't limited to its significant impact as African people. It was the most amazing development, socio-economic development by people who supposedly were ignorant and had no formal education. David, think about it. 1838, we came off the slave plantation. They didn't teach us, other than those that were in what we call house slaves. They were not exposed to any form of formal education. But the second we came off that platform, we knew a couple of things. We came off with a plan. I want to start off by this because people like to say Black people don't plan. We walked off those plantations, and the first thing we did is we purchased plantations in the next decade cash. I want the audience to just think about what it means to be able to purchase an estate cash. People took that money, they pooled their resources. It's not as if David Hines was the millionaire and he went and paid for it. They pooled their resources, purchased these estates, but that's not all that happened. They then developed the plan of how we were going to live in villages. We had the first depth, so to speak, for residential purposes. We then divided it going down, second depth, third depth, pasture, then agricultural lands. Every person, and these are slaves who were not formally educated, formerly enslaved. If you had a lot in front, you had a right to plant in the back, you had a right to pasture in the back. Think about whether today any community can purchase a village, Victoria, cash. Imagine writing a check for how much? $1 billion. And it's not as if they had oil. It is not as if they had access to the state resources. It was not as if they had gold. They did this on their own earnings. And very rarely in the teaching of history today to students who are in school does any of that get thought. Nothing gets taught. It's always glossed over. 1834, you went into a period of, I can't remember what they call it. Apprenticeship. And then by 1838, the people came off. And then they say, oh, the people buy the estates. And then here's what happens. They say the Black people could not manage these estates. They couldn't manage it. Biggest lie. What was happening was the white farmers were flooding Black lands. If you think of what happens today, we got a little drought, or if you got a flood, well, the first thing that happens, the state runs in and pays these farmers, who of course are one ethnicity, tons of money just to ameliorate one single failure, one flood. Back, our ancestors, this was a constant battle. Every single time the crop was about to be harvested, the estates would get flooded, and there was no state to come and give these people money. So the economic structure of those villages was under severe pressure, and they did not have any access to state funds. These people of their own resources were able to to manage that. They had to be vigilant. So again, none of this is taught in the school. All of this is an essential part of our history. Then we come to the village movement. The village movement was unprecedented not only in Guyana, it was unprecedented in the entire Caribbean. Think of the intellectual resources, the level of maturity, the level of contribution of those people at that time to be able to manage that entire African society. If you think about it, no, we can't even manage what's going on here without fighting each other and in a million different directions. We can't do that in 2024. These people who, having come out of the most adverse of circumstances, were able to organize. They were able to be economically successful. And what happened, because of the pressure that came from the plantation owners, because of the pressure that came from the government, a lot of them realized that they could not continue to be economically viable in the community, and they were forced, you were discussing this last night, into the Georgetown, and therefore the only jobs they could really find to make it was in the civil service. But when they came, and this was since back in the on the villages, we understood the vital role that education played. So if you think of the period between 1838 and 1905, during that period, Black people couldn't get licenses to sell. Only the Portuguese got licenses to operate shops. Only the Portuguese got licenses to operate shops in the estate where they were selling to the indentured Indians, and only the Portuguese got licenses to sell to Black people. You came into Georgetown, only the Portuguese got those licenses, other than Bookers, who of course owned the country. So you then had Black people backs against the wall. They can't even sell to themselves. The state did not allow them to sell to themselves and keep the money within the community, because the economic structure that was there was dedicated towards sending all the Black money out of the African community. So again, revisionism. When they tell us today that Black people can't run businesses, the whole structure of the foundation of Guyana was set up so they were supposed to fail, because they couldn't even get licenses to trade amongst themselves. And it was as a result of those adverse economic circumstances that they had that they still survived. So we have to tell the real story. All of us have to tell our truth. And that comes all the way through. Portuguese, the bread riots, well, 1899 or 1905, can't remember when it was. I think it was 1899.
1899, the
Cent bread riots.
Yes.
All that history, you don't no young person, whether African or otherwise, gets educated on that. Critchlow, the whole the workers on the waterfront, the agitating for and the organization, the unions that started early 1900s, none of that is in the school curriculum. So if you think about it, by the time a kid gets to fifth form, assuming that they stay in school till fifth form, their history of Guyana is distorted. And then they go into the real world with this negative view that Black people can't run businesses, Black people are hostile to each other, they can't manage themselves, when the greatest management of economic resources took place immediately post-emancipation. And that goes to the core of a lot of self-confidence. So when we pour in these students out onto the road and they have no self-confidence because the education they have been given in school leads them to believe that their parents were incapable and not worthy, then you have a problem. So what happens here is the UN specifically said, and this is the UN who were dealing with this, and I just want to quote them directly in their recommendation. This is what they said, and this is the UN decade. They must give recognition to the victims and their descendants through they must ensure the textbooks and other educational materials reflect historic facts accurately as they relate to past tragedies and atrocities, in particular, slavery, the slave trade, the transatlantic slave trade, and colonialism, so as to avoid stereotypes and the distortion or falsification of these historic facts, which may lead to racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerance, including the role of respective countries therein by research, education, etc. This is in the decade, and this came about since 2000 and eventually. So this is the UN decade, which the government of Guyana, irrespective of which party is in government, is obligated to facilitate. Obligated. So this decade said, look, in your textbooks, in your educational material, you have to be historically accurate. You have to avoid stereotypes. I am unaware, I'm not the authority in this, of any single textbook in Guyana that has been specifically introduced or modified to recognize and include in its contents the obligations Guyana has under the decade of people of African descent. So that's just the beginning of revisionism, and we can talk forever about it. But you asked me to give you an example, and that is an example. That's a classic example. One of the things about the slave trade, we were always taught that there were these good-minded English people who sat in England Wilberforce, and they had a strong human conscience, and that's why they wanted to get rid of the slave trade. Absolutely not. The slave trade wasn't making money. It stopped making money, and the British figured if we shut it down, we are now going to make sure that we could enforce the others, because economically it no longer made money. They no longer needed. They were starting to go through that industrialization, and it wasn't as simple as that. So we have to ensure that the country of Guyana, which has signed on to the decade, doesn't pay lip service to the objectives of the decade, but it implements its obligations that it signed on to under the decade.
Under the decade, Nigel Hughes coming to us from Geneva, Switzerland, attending that forum, United Nations Forum on the People of African Descent. We are dealing with the revisionism that has now become a staple in our discourse on race and racism and reparations and so forth. And it's not. And I want you all to listen to me here carefully. And I'm going to ask Nigel to respond to it as I did last night with Brother Vincent. This is not Mr. Harry on the corner of the street, or Mr. Balgobin, or Miss Sita who's saying this. It is the government of Guyana that is part of the revisionism. The government, how do I know that? The government issued a response to Itpadaji's presentation last year. The government issued a response. And part of the response said, and Nigel hinted at this, and I want him to expand a little bit on it because I think it's important where this revisionism is going. Because you see, when you revise the history, you create a narrative, and out of that narrative comes policy. All right? They're saying that, look, Black people are in the position they are today because they made some business mistakes. They bought abandoned plantations, and then when they bought the plantations, they decide to plant food rather than plant crops to export and make money. And as a result of that, they are where they are today, not part of the entrepreneurial sector. It has to do with bad choices they made. There's nothing more venomous, more dangerous to race relations than that, because it goes to the core of the economic condition of African, and the state responds to that condition that Nigel has spent a lot of time in recent years chronicling. This is serious business. You see, whether it's apartheid, or it was segregation, or it was Hitler's story in Germany, there was always the intellectual narrative. And this intellectual narrative that's coming from our government about why African Guyanese are where they are in the economic sector is poisonous and dangerous. Nigel Hughes, can you please, sir, please address that angle and the implications of that for us today?
David. All right, here's where I'll jump in.
Yes.
1838. Emancipation.
We've lost your audio there for a minute. We've lost your audio, Nigel. We've lost Nigel's audio. While he's getting it fixed there, I want you all to digest what I just said. Nigel, we're not hearing you.
Yes. Are you hearing
You're
me?
back now. You're back now. Yes.
Okay, sorry. So 1838, this huge collection of African people leave the estate after emancipation. Remember, in 1823, sorry, we had the largest uprising, peaceful uprising again. Peaceful uprising in 1823 because our foreparents thought that they had been given their freedom before. They didn't kill a single person. And what was the response of the colonial government? They beheaded 120 at parade ground, and then in the villages, they beheaded a whole set. And that is less than 15 years before emancipation. The British now don't want to have to negotiate with the African labor to pay them what would be competitive rates, because they were getting the labor for free before because they were chattel. Start to bring indentured people on the contract from another part of the world, which the British controlled. We don't go into the terms of the indentured labor of that contract. That contract said, look, if you stayed in Guyana, you would get land, and you could get up to 12 acres of land if you had 5 to 6 children. And there was a scale. So at the end of your period of indentureship, which you voluntarily entered into, you could either get money and go back to India, or you could get land, equivalent to the 40 acres and a mule in the United States. You understand the economic advantage that the indentured servants started off with. The blacks, or the Africans who had been here for 250 years before that, didn't get a single acre. Didn't get a single acre in compensation from the British government. The British government compensated the slave owners. So just from a pure economic point of view, here you had indentures who came, they entered into a contract, they were paid for their labor, and at the end of that time, they either got a lump sum or they got land. So, and as you know, land is the most important asset in any economic structure. That land, secondly, at that time, no licenses were ever given to Africans. So when people say we went into crops and we didn't go into export, we couldn't export. You could see a black man driving a cart full of any product, whether it's rice, tomatoes, whatever, to the wharf by John Fernandez or SS De Freitas and say he putting it on a boat to take overseas. No, he couldn't do it. There was not a single commercial house that was dealing with black people at that level. That was reserved for our Portuguese brothers and sisters. They had that locked off. So the black person could only do effectively a little trade amongst themselves. They couldn't even sell cheese and cigarettes because you had to get a license to do it.
Yeah.
Imagine if today black people couldn't sell or they couldn't get licenses. So they start off not only by not giving them, they couldn't get credit to the bank. This is the other thing. They couldn't get credit to the bank. That's why they were a cash-based society. No other ethnic group in Guyana, none, has been subject to that. Not a single other ethnic group. So we started 10 steps backwards as a result of the structure. So if you start in 10 steps back, you ain't get no land, you don't have access to the banking system, you can't export, you can't, you got to hustle and try and go in and you start to work as a civil servant because that's the only way you're getting money when you move to Georgetown. You got to work as a policeman, you got to work as a teacher. If you work a little hard and your family save a little bit, they send you away to England to do law or they send you to do medicine. Those are the economic circumstances. Our Indian brothers and sisters not only got land, but after a while, they got licenses to be able to trade. So what happened is the color of the business environment, the commercial environment, moved from being Portuguese exclusively, the whole of Water Street, the whole of Regent Street, into being Portuguese and Indian, because black people weren't allowed to get into that. They weren't allowed to import goods, and they weren't allowed to export goods. That's by law. That went on for over 100 years after emancipation. So those circumstances obviously impaired black entrepreneurism. And as young people coming up looking on, as all young people do, at what was happening, all they could go and do is become policemen, nurses, teachers, and if the family was lucky enough to pool enough resources, or those that went into insurance or were selling insurance and what have you, they might save the money and go to England to qualify and come back. Now, the most important instrument to oppress any people, any part of the planet, irrespective of their color, is you got to lock off their brain. And people use many things to lock off your brain. By locking off your brain, I mean they have to impart into you a philosophy that makes you feel happy with your role in life, and therefore you're not going to become disruptive. And the logical explanation for that, and it goes through from centuries before, the 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5% of any society could only control the remaining 95% if they lock off their brain. There's no way if you got 1,000 Africans to one Caucasian person, every night they know that 10% of them Africans, if they get up, they would kill you. So how you do that? You lock off the brain. And how did they lock off the brain? They tell you, yo, you're supposed to suffer in this earth, but heaven, there's somewhere else. And unless you behave yourself, and by behave yourself means you have to be subservient, and you recognize the king and all this stuff they give you, you will not get to heaven. And that is the means by which this mass of African labor was able to be subjected, because it must have crossed the minds of a lot of them. Here, this number here looking ridiculous. Why we can't go ahead? And 1863, when coffee started, the revolution came, the uprising, came. It wasn't just an uprising. They managed that colony and traded. And the essence of the African people, which is essentially nonviolent, they didn't want to plunder and kill unless they had to. They treated their former slave owners with dignity. This has never been returned to them at any time. Look at what happened afterwards. With Atta and the rest of them, they either hung them, they slaughtered them, they did all they had to do. And so when you have that, when they have that level of control over your consciousness by saying to you that you have to think this way and you can't think about you being emancipated, you start off with a population that thinks it's inferior. It feels that it can't go certain places. And then when you have a social structure that says, look, the darkest are at the bottom, the lighter people in the middle, and the Caucasians are at the top. People believe that. You know that in the 50s and 60s, there's no way your sister, looking like you, would have gotten the job in the bank.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way anybody that was dark skinned was getting anywhere into any of those financial institutions as an employee. And I dare say this: Guyana is the only place in the Caribbean where we removed that inherent color structure. If my Jamaican friends, my Trinidad trip friends, my Barbadian friends, I have the greatest respect for them, but that inherent color structure exists in those communities, and you gotta know your place. To live up the hill, you got to be a certain color to get up the hill.
Mm-hmm.
But like all systems, you need the exception to say, look, we're not discriminating. Ghana was the only place to change that. And that changed between 1970 and I would say the 80s, early 80s.
Yes.
We don't
Yeah.
appreciate what that does to a person because it allows you to think that you are capable of doing things that you never otherwise would have been considered. So we have a lot of we have a lot of work to do. And this has to be captured in the history books. And it has to be captured in the way in which we teach all of our students about our country. Because this is Guyana. All of us entitled to this. We don't have no group that got any superior, well, that is entitled to any superior position. Everybody must get their just desserts. And where you have exploited people for free for centuries, and as a consequence, they have been damaged. I wouldn't say irreparably, but seriously damaged psychologically, physically, economically. Then there's serious repair work that has to be done.
Serious repair work that has to be done. Brother Nigel Hughes coming to us tonight from Geneva, Switzerland, where he is part of the IPADG delegation to the third Forum of the People of African Descent, sponsored by the United Nations. Nigel, you said here, and I want to get to it. You quoted, you say, we draw attention to the attention of this body. We draw the attention of this body to the concluding observations of the recent Human Rights Committee hearing on Guyana. And you quote that committee. And I am reading that quotation and what you said after the quotation. The committee remains concerned about the absence of comprehensive anti-discrimination legislation that may extend beyond discrimination in employment, provide full and effective protection against all forms of discrimination prohibited under the covenant, including direct, indirect, and multiple discrimination. End of quote. And you said this: African Guyanese are its daily victims. May I repeat? African Guyanese are its daily victims. Nigel, expand a little, as I've been asking you to do all night.
David, those words you read are not the words of David Hines. They're not the words of a Apatagy. They're not the words of Nigel Hughes. They're not the words of Aubrey Norton, Mr. Ford. They're not the words of Bar Jack Dio. They're not the words of Irfan Ali. That is the United Nations Human Rights Commission's words. They held a hearing, and that is what they found in discrimination. Those are their words. They are concerned in 2024. Those are their words. This is not a body where you could say somebody is trying to influence them, like we tend to say in Guyana. That is the UN Human Rights Commission making very, very damning findings in relation to discrimination in Guyana. Well, discrimination can only come from the people that hold power and use power against those that don't have it.
Yes.
The powerless can't discriminate against the powerful. And the fact that the Human Rights Commission said they are concerned, you have to say, who are they talking to? It could only be the holders of power. And the discrimination in Guyana is against the powerless. And what is the difference between those in power and those who are not in power? Basically, in Guyana, our politics is ethnically based.
Yes.
So they are saying to the people who are in power, that is predominantly one ethnic group, we find that there is discrimination. We are concerned about it. And they go on to specifically identify the most important thing. So it's not just we saying that socially you discriminate, but you don't invite David to your house or you don't invite Nigel to your house. What they're saying is that there is inadequate legislative protection against discrimination in the laws of Guyana. They make it very clear. So in other words, they not only find discrimination, they say that the laws are inadequate to protect them. So when I went on to say that African Guyanese are the victims, it follows from what they said.
Mm-hmm.
They find there's discrimination. The African Guyanese don't have no power in Guyana. The power is in the hands of the government of the day, which is PPP, which has a traditional base, just as how the PNC has a traditional base. And so that statement that I made, that the Africans are the daily victims, is the logical consequence of what the UN Human Rights Commission said expressly. But here is the most important part of this that nobody is discussing. The same commission directed the government to disseminate this information and their findings widely. So not only did they say that we are concerned about the level of discrimination, but you, the state, to whom we are speaking and whom we are questioning, and to whom we say that there is inadequate legislative protection against discrimination, we are saying to you now, you have to go and disseminate this information. And just in case that they want to suggest that I'm misleading you, let me just give you the exact language that they use. What they said was that they find it, they have to, was in the last, am I looking at the right? No, this is the decade. So let me just get this from here. I'm sorry about this. I just want to give you the exact language.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, David, I'll come back to it only because I'm going to search for it as we speak.
Right.
But they made it very clear that it is the responsibility of the government of the day to disseminate their findings to the general population. I have not heard a single effort taken by the government based on the recommendations of the Human Rights Commission, in which they have notified the general public about the observations of the UN Human Rights Commission.
The UN Human Rights Commission, Brother Nigel Hughes there. And towards the end of his presentation, Brother Nigel made a recommendation on behalf of IPAD-G and the Ghana Day Committee. And I would like to read that recommendation and get a response from Nigel. The recommendation is that the forum urge the government of Guyana to ensure that history of African descendants is identified as a compulsory subject in schools, thus providing for the delivery of education as a practical model for understanding the society, the inculcation of traditional values which predate the colonial project, as well as the conduct of public affairs. This would entail considering every activity and relationship in the school, formal, non formal, and informal, as teaching moments for the molding of the students into citizens who abhor and outlaw discrimination and disrespect while embracing mutual respect and cohesion in all spheres of life. That is the recommendation from ITPADG and Ghana Committee, the message that they have delivered to the forum that they are attending. Nigel Hughes made this presentation on behalf of ITPADG. I don't think we got to it because the 2 minutes I think ran out before
That's correct.
he was finished. But Nigel, I would like you to expand on that, if any expansion is needed at all.
I'll come to that. I found it.
Okay,
Let me just read exactly what it is. It's in paragraph 48 of the UN Human Rights Commission's report in Guyana. It says the state party should widely disseminate the covenant, its periodic report, and the present concluding observations, what I've just dealt with you, with a view to raising awareness of the rights enshrined in the covenant among the judicial, legislative, and administrative authorities, civil society, non-governmental organizations operating in the country. So the Human Rights Commission directed the state to disseminate information from their periodic report that said that they were concerned about discrimination in Guyana. They have to disseminate it for the purposes of raising awareness of the rights enshrined in the covenant. So in other words, the Human Rights Commission said to the government of Guyana, you have to circulate our findings to the whole population so that they understand, first of all, that we're concerned about the discrimination, and you have an obligation to also educate them about the rights that are protected under the covenant. Just wanted to read that to confirm. So it wasn't a Nigel Hughes. But coming back to what you just read, the recommendations of this, and we lose track of this. Guyana is economically in its best position it has ever been. I can't imagine how successful it was in sugar in 1815 when we were supposed to have had the best sugar, but I don't think it's comparative. So all of us have to live in this modern society called Guyana. So we are at the stage now where we have to craft a new modern society in which every component of our ethnic groups has a role and is respected. So the obvious thing that arises is, how are we going to create this modern citizen, this modern Guyanese citizen? And in molding the modern Guyanese citizen, we can't repeat the mistakes of the past. We have to make sure all the citizens appreciate and understand the contributions, the history of all the ethnic groups, so that when we graduate these students out of high school, when we graduate them out of community colleges, when we graduate them out of university and technical colleges, this new modern Guyanese citizen is going to be well grounded in the history of all of its people. It will understand who came from South India, who came from Middle India, who came from Africa, the indigenous. And they will have an educated, accurate, historic perspective, so that when they're talking about building Guyana after we're gone, you have a modern, bright set of young people who are not they have no discriminatory bones. They're not thinking hostilely about another group, thinking about a modern Guyana, and they appreciate where that has come. Those who have had to get reparations have gotten it. Those who have had to comply with the obligations of the decade, which is post-emancipation, would get that. The education systems would be set up. so that none of those people will be starting at a position of disadvantage. It will take time to get there, but that is what that is about.
That is what that is about, the recommendation for the history of African people to be taught in schools, and it's coming from Ipadaji. Nigel, as we wind down, I know you have a long day tomorrow because there are 2 more days of the forum. You want to give us your closing thoughts?
First of all, David, again, allow me to express my gratitude to you for having given Ipadagy an opportunity to see what it's doing. I heard last night that a lot of this week will be dedicated to it. Vincent was excellent last night. I want to take the opportunity to say good luck to both Olive and Darren, who will be presenting tomorrow. What I would like to encourage all citizens of Guyana, not just the African citizens, all, if you can sign in and listen to those proceedings, even if you don't agree with them, I am sure you will gather information and approaches which you might not have thought of before, and therefore that can only enrich and enhance your ability to analyze and maybe allow you to step into the shoes of someone else and understand a different historical perspective. This is not racist, and I've heard you say this repeatedly. The fact that you discuss your ethnicity doesn't make you a racist. As a matter of fact, quite the contrary. Everybody has to understand where they come from, what their history is, because it puts us in a better position to discuss about the future. So I would like to encourage everyone, come with an open mind, listen if you have the time, and if you don't have the time, at least at some stage, see if you can read the extracts. Guyana is a signatory to a lot of international conventions that we don't know about, that there's not a lot of information about. And a lot of those conventions give you rights you don't even know you have.
Mm-hmm.
And so one of the things I would encourage you to do is to become familiar with this, because there's no point talking in a vacuum if you're not aware of what else is out there. So those would be my parting words. And of course, like I said, my very sincere gratitude for affording me the opportunity tonight.
Thank you very much, Brother Nigel Hughes. And as usual, we are grateful to you for what you continue to do for us as an ethnic group, but what you continue to do for Guyana and by extension, our Caribbean. Much is expected from those to whom much has been given. And Nigel made reference to the opening up of opportunities in the early years after independence. It made it possible for people, boys and girls looking like him and like me and like some of you, to get the opportunities that were denied us because of the color of our skin or the way that we look or speak or the part of the country from which we came. Nigel, again, thank you very much, my brother.
Thank you.
And to you, the audience, I continue to be grateful because this project, we are doing this together. We are moving on together. As I said last Friday, Tory and Tory make all the way there. Tory and Tory make all the way there. We are all in this together, and we are on a mission. And that mission is to create a new African consciousness in this time as Guyana is transitioning into a petro state with all the glory that comes with that, but all the potential pitfalls that come with it. We want the African to be in a position to be able to take advantage, but also to help to shape the direction in which our country is going. We are on a mission. Carter G. Woodson talked about the new Negro. We are talking about a new African consciousness, a new African consciousness that draws on our old consciousness, mixing it up together with the present to create a new sense of ourselves and a new sense of our being. We are African and we are proud. we must always be proud or be African. In order to be a proud Guyanese, you have to be a proud African Guyanese. We are doing this together and we ain't stopping. Nobody is going to turn us back. Who do not want to come on the train, sorry for you, because the train is moving. Stop that train, they say. I want to come on, but the train is moving. The train is moving. Tomorrow night, we were either going to have young Darren Wade or Sister Olive Sampson. We're continuing to cover that meeting in Geneva. So we are going to be on tomorrow night and Friday night with our coverage of the Forum for the People of African Descent, the UN Forum for the People of African Descent. We come in peace as usual, but we come with a peace that is focused like a razor. Focus. What they say? Keep your eyes on the prize. Love yourself. Love yourself. Because if you don't love yourself, give yourself a chance. Because if you don't give yourself a chance, they're going to kick we out of the dance. And that would never, ever be something that we want to countenance. See you all tomorrow.
If you hear black is beautiful, Santa Claus. Black is beautiful. It's a textile. Lift your head like me. You got to